I worked for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1999, the year that Paul McCartney was inducted as a solo artist. And my job was to edit his induction and his acceptance speech for television. That turned out to be a hell of a thing because he was drunk, by the time he gave his speech, because they drink a lot at these things. I didn't go to the ceremony itself, but I was there, part of a team. And, I told the whole story in a different podcast of my struggles to make Paul appear less drunk against the will of the director of the thing, who just wanted to get it done in a hurry. And, he said, don't bother cleaning it up. We don't got time for that, because it was going to be on television, like the next day or something ridiculous like that. I guess they liked my work, because a couple of years later, I got hired again. And this time I was going to be at the ceremony. And they said, listen, we need a cameraman. They said, I said, who's going to be inducted? They said, the Ramones, Talking Heads, and Tom Petty. I was, great, I'd love to see those guys. And the guy goes, you're not going to see them. You're going to be filming the audience. Your back will be to the stage the entire evening. I said, okay, because I knew there'd be celebrities in the audience anyway, so I thought it would be fun. They said, we need a second camera person doing the audience, so can you get somebody? I said, yeah, sure. And I knew good people, but I was bumming around the East Village in New York where I lived, and I saw a flyer on a lamppost, and it said, female filmmaker seeks apartment in East Village. And then it put her name and phone number. Her name was Tia. And I said, hey, what the hell? I got nothing to lose. Why don't I just hire her? I knew nothing about her. So I rang her up and I said, hey, I saw your flyer. She says, you have an apartment for me? I said, no. And I don't know why she didn't hang up, but she said, what then? I said, well, you said you're a filmmaker, and so am I, and I have a job, I want to hire you for. She says, really? What's that? I said, it's the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame award ceremony. Need a camera person. She said, who's nominated? I said, Talking Heads, Ramones, and Tom Petty. She said, I'd love to see those guys. I said, well, you're not going to see them. Your back is going to be to the stage the entire night because you're filming the audience. She said, okay, I'll still do it. So I hired her on the spot over the telephone. I hadn't met her. I never laid eyes on the girl. And I didn't meet her until the night of the ceremony at the Waldorf in New York. And turns out she was very beautiful. And I said, all right, here's what we're going to do. And, don't look at the stage, just film the people in the audience. There were celebrities like Bjork and fucking Richard Belzer, of all people. And I don't know, I can't remember who else. And of course, the inductees were all sitting at tables while they waited their turn. So David Byrne is there, and Tina Weymouth, who we're going to get to in a minute, and the Ramones, the surviving members, were there, and Tom Petty. They're all sitting in the audience. So, we're filming, going around and stuff like that. And then at the end, because Tia, the girl, was so good looking, one of the dudes from the Ramones said, hey, we're having an after party on like the 12th floor of this hotel, the Waldorf Astoria. You want to come? It was in a hotel room in the same building. And God bless the girl. She said, yeah, I'll come if my boss can come too. I guess I was her boss. And I was there packing up equipment and stuff, and he looked over at me. He's like, I didn't know what they were talking about, but I saw him look at me. And he kind of, I think I learned later, he sort of reluctantly agreed that I could come too. So, by the way, about the Paul's drunken acceptance speech before, I did make a full video about that where you can hear about it. I'll put a link to it at the end of this video. So she disappears, and I'm dealing with the equipment there, and finally I'm done with that. So I go up to the room, and I go in, and right there, it's well, the first thing you see is there's a small bar right in front of the entrance door to the hotel room. And there's goddamn Paul Schaefer, who was the musical director of the ceremonies. And Paul Schaefer, he's at the bar with Tia, just hovering over her and practically drooling over her. And he was a married man at the time. I'm sure he still is. But his intentions were pretty obvious. Anyway, I come in and Tia says, "Oh, Paul," like they were already on a first-name basis. "Oh, Paul, this is Michael. He's the one who hired me." And Paul's like, hi. He was like, he didn't want me to be part of this thing. And I had been to the Letterman show on a night in the 90s when it's a notorious episode where Madonna was on and she was cussing the whole time and smoking cigars and stuff like that, and she refused to leave the stage. And I said, Paul, I was at that show with Madonna when she created such a ruckus. I was in the audience. And Paul goes, "Yeah, I was on the stage." Fucking asshole. So I figured I'd just leave Schaefer to his own devices, and I kind of sidled away. And there I lay eyes upon Tina Weymouth, bassist for Talking Heads. A pure vision of beauty, if I've ever seen one, right there before my eyes. Someone who I've always had a crush on, and drunk. She was just as drunk as Paul McCartney was 3 years earlier. Because it's a long night there at the thing. There's wine, and people get drunk. And she was quite drunk. And so I went up to her and I said something very complimentary to her. I can't remember what it was, but she kind of like smiled and she stepped towards me, and then she put her arms around me. She embraced me like very closely. It was a hell of a moment for a kid like me who used to look at her pictures in Cream magazine. And the embrace didn't stop until her husband, what's his name? Her husband, Chris Franz, who's the drummer of Talking Heads, came over and kind of peeled her off of me. That was sort of the end of my experience with her. But, it's memorable. And, the Ramones were there. That was pretty cool. I didn't talk to them, but I saw them. And Tom Petty, also I didn't talk to him. David Byrne was not there. Figures, yeah. But I guess the upshot of the whole thing is there was no upshot.